I'd like to call the meeting of the Santa Margarita Groundwater Agency of October 24th to order. Can I please have a roll call?
Director Cassidy.
Here.
Director Dillis.
Here.
Director Engford.
Here.
Director Koenig is joining us remotely. I can see him there.
And I'm here.
I'm there. Director Koopman.
Here.
Director Lockett. Here. Director McPherson.
Here.
Chair Perry.
Here.
Vice Chair Smalley.
Here.
Director Stiles.
Here.
And Director Pollock is absent with notice. I'm just gonna take a quick look and note if we have any alternate Director Lang attending, not voting, but in attendance. And okay,
Okay, thank you. Are there any additions, deletions to the agenda? Hearing none, are there oral communications on matters not on the agenda from anyone in the vast public that's watching us raptly or sitting out there?
That we may have something.
Yes, she's got earphones on. Okay, hearing none. And is there anyone watching us besides the alternate? Just out of curiosity.
we have looks like 5 members
Great.
in total, or 4 members in total, and I'm not seeing any hands going up there, so.
Okay, so how about the consent agenda? Do I have a motion or any comments on the minutes?
Approval of the consent agenda.
I'll second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Chair, it occurs to me because we have a director attending remotely, we do a roll call.
Do we have to do a roll call again?
I'll confirm.
If it's not-
I'll defer to Terry, but I thought if we had
Okay,
somebody
all right.
remote, then we had to go roll call.
There's the one thing in the government code that says they want to be able to track the yays and nays of parties, so at the end of the year, they can say, oh, you're a good person or you're a bad person. So it is now done, you can say everybody except, you don't have to do a full roll call, but you can do it many ways, just so it's noted who's doing a yay and who's doing a nay, so the public can track.
Leave that up to Tim as our parliamentarian in this sense.
I'm gonna do a quick roll call.
Go ahead.
Why don't we just record the name?
But I have to ask the question,
What, can we just record the names?
if nobody said no,
Right, there's no.
Then, no, it would just be unanimous.
so it's unanimous.
It's unanimous,
know
but that would have to be noted as well.
Okay.
That, I supervise our director Koenig as our remote attendee. Any comment?
Aye, I'm sorry for any difficulty.
So I would, for the recording, I will say that was unanimous, all ayes, no nays. Perfect. Okay, presentations, groundwater sustainability program update.
Rob has a presentation, so I'm gonna pull the slides up, share my screen.
We don't stand for this and send those.
So a few updates, we're gonna take a little bit of time to do some reminders of some of our sustainable management criteria since it's a relatively light agenda. And we do have some new representatives on the board as well.
Hold on, Rob, I need to pull your presentation up before I can share. Otherwise it blocks my sharing ability here. Okay, should be visible to everybody.
Okay, next slide. So 3 items tonight. The first one will be an update on activities related to the Department of Water Resources under Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, or SMGWA. Recall that when the department approved our plan, one of the recommended corrective actions was for us to watch as they develop interconnected surface water guidance. And ultimately, when that comes out, when we do our periodic evaluation, to consider adjustments to our plan based on those. So after we last met, the department released 2 technical papers related to interconnected surface water, and they posted not a live, but they posted a recorded webinar online related to those two documents, explaining what they mean. Those were just posted. On the two technical papers, they really go into how do you model stream depletions associated with groundwater extraction. They really want to focus on that. The good news is we have a model. The bad news is I really don't like the approach that they took with that. They really want you to go, the example that they give has you go back 50 years historically and calculate the depletion that occurred. Sigma requires that you comply with the law as of January 1st, conditions of 2015. So why would you go back 50 years? What's the relevance of seepage that occurred 50 years prior to the effective date of that? It's not necessarily required, but it sort of sets a bad tone when they're giving that as an example of how you should be calculating stream depletion. It's also a very simplistic way that they have you model this. They don't really consider what the complexity of the system. They don't consider when you're doing conjunctive use program, when you're using more surface water during wet conditions and such. So there are quite a few people that are concerned with the two technical documents that did come out. Those comments are due on November 18th, and there's a small subcommittee of the Association of California Water Agencies, or ACWA, professionals. I've attended this small group, and we're consolidating some comments to send to the department with respect to the technical documents. But of greatest concern is after these technical documents are done, then they intend to release guidance on interconnected surface waters. And we're a little concerned with where they're going to go with that. In the webinar, they give a little bit of a highlight of what to expect in it, although they're still accepting comments on what to put in that guidance. If, for those of you that were on the ad hoc review committee, you recall that the guidance that was released for the annual reports was very substantive. There was a lot more that we ended up doing last year than we had done previously as a result of their guidance to comply with that. In this case,
Rob, can you help us understand the process they typically go through with respect to guidance? For example, did they issue draft guidance as a solicitation for comment before finalizing, or did they just drop the final guidance?
It's unclear. They are soliciting comment on the technical papers that were released. It's
Right.
unclear on if they'll solicit comments on their guidance. They did not on the annual reports, if you recall.
Thanks.
The concern is this last item, and I know it's a little small to see, but department expectations and assessment really makes you wonder, what are they planning to do? Are they planning to review everybody's model for adequacy? Because the way that they're describing, it has to be a really good tool. You know, that's not in their purview, but it feels like they're gonna get a little bit under the hood, which is a significant concern with where they might be going with this guidance. So we're gonna continue to stay tuned. And again, I think participating with the AQUA effort will be most effective.
Because they are, yeah.
Another update is September 25th, there was a webinar hosted by the Resources Secretary, Wade Crowfoot. They had presentations on 10 years of Sigma and where do we stand. Deputy Director Goslin, who's the Sustainability Director at Department of Water Resources overseeing Sigma, recognized that there was a concern. He was asked, what keeps you up at night? And his first answer was, the cost of compliance for small basins is an issue. And yeah, I almost jumped out of my chair. So clearly the Small Basin Coalition that Sierra Ryan has been participating in has had an impact and we've been heard. Unfortunately, he followed up with, and we're developing some webinars on how to.
On how to print
So there's still some work to do. We want to focus on costs, not on what they can do to tell us what to do. So that was interesting. And again, the coalition is very active. And in fact, we're having a meeting to strategize on what they're going to be doing over the next year or two in the very near future. DWR Projects and Management Actions module, I reported on this to you at our August meeting. The department is taking our projects and management actions that we described in our plan and converting those into a database and into a module that will be hosted on their website. And we have 20 projects or management actions in our plan between our groups 1, 2, and 3. They took everything that was in there and converted that into this big database with 45 columns of data. Some of that's just Latin long, things like that, simple. But a lot of it is the description of the project, other impacted stem of management criteria, and a lot of different things that they pulled out of our plan. They just released that to us last week and we're gonna be going through and reviewing it for, did they get it right? Did they pull it out of our plan right? Did they understand what we intended? And also there are some areas that they want us, we didn't address it necessarily in our groundwater sustainability plan. One example would be our group 3 projects, which we don't intend to do unless we absolutely have to. They wanted us to talk about what source of water we have to implement those projects. So we're gonna have to kind of reconcile some of those distinctions, but I'll get in touch with them to make sure they understand that was not the intent of group 3. You really have to have that type of information. That review is due by November 15th, and then ultimately all of the GSPs and their project management actions statewide will be posted on this website. So, the 2 other items I'm gonna talk about were our 2024 dry season stream monitoring, and then we'll talk about water levels that were just collected in the fall. Dry season stream monitoring is set to conclude October 31st. The consultant will go out and remove the equipment, so that in the event we have a significant storm like we did back in 2022, we don't lose that equipment. We did have 1 redundant data logger at Newell Creek fail during the period. Fortunately, we knew we had a low battery and it probably wasn't gonna make it through the full season, so we had another data logger at that site, so we didn't lose any data. We'll consider whether or not we need to get another redundant data for our next season of monitoring next year. All monitoring is within the planned budget, and that's great because we did additional monitoring this year and we're still within the budget for the year. And Santa Cruz County is actually providing in-kind monitoring of our groundwater dependent ecosystems. They're going out to several sites around the basin. They will be doing that October 30th and 31st when they provide those services in kind. And I always mention it because we really appreciate that. So some of the data, the consultant did go out in mid-October and take instantaneous measurements at several of the locations. And so one of the interesting parts about our basin to remember is the San Lorenzo River is effectively on our western boundary, just about our western boundary. So when we monitor streams, we're mostly monitoring tributaries from the east going into that. So we're really not accounting for a lot of the western tributaries, some of which could be pretty significant depending on the year type. But what we've been compiling here is this represents an instantaneous measurement from, again, mid-September, I should have said, at each of these locations. And so we monitor the basin at the San Lorenzo River coming in at above Love Creek. And what this shows is the same period of time in the 4 previous years. So obviously 2021 shown in blue, very dry, 2022, dry, 2023, fantastic, shown in gray, and this year, all shown in yellow. So for comparison purposes. So we can see that in general, 2024 was significantly better than obviously than 2022. A little bit less than 2023, not unexpected. And recall, all of this flow, there was no precipitation during this entire time. So this is all contribution from the groundwater basin into these creeks. So it gives us an idea of the health of the groundwater basin flowing into these systems. San Lorenzo River at Big Trees, you can see the flow in mid-September was 26 cubic feet a second. That was on par with 2023. So very interesting. It would indicate that a lot of contributions coming in again from those western creeks as compared, because when you look at the eastern tributaries, they're all pretty much on par with what we saw before, like in 2022. So good conditions. No, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm done with the slide. So
Okay, what, this is to what date is it?
this one is on the mid-September reading, but we'll collect, again, we have data loggers at all these sites as well. So we're collecting, I'm not even sure the frequency at this point, if it's 15 minutes or hourly at each one of these sites through October 31st. So we have a good detailed data set that we'll be downloading and presenting it to report at the beginning of the year. Correct.
It's interesting, there was a lot of water in this last year, there was a lot of water registered at the Big Trees.
Yeah.
But it doesn't really come in from Ziante or Bean Creek or Newell Creek, all that extra water, but it's coming in somewhere below Love Creek, so there's someplace.
Yeah, and again, I
Along
think
the
it's
San Lorenzo River.
the tributaries outside of the basin, so Fall Creek. And the folks at San Lorenzo can obviously correct me, but I suspect it's a lot of stuff coming in from those, that location. Yeah, it says that there's a lot of flow coming in, sort of relatively speaking, from that area.
Remember, there was supposed to be along the San Lorenzo River, they cut through several boundary layers there, and there's supposed to be water coming out of the deposits right alongside San Lorenzo there,
Yeah.
that maybe that's a significant factor too. Are we gonna get Fall Creek data? Are we gonna get Fall Creek data in here? We're not measuring.
We don't put that
gets
in our
measured by
reports,
San
but it is,
Lorenzo
it is
Valley,
measured, correct?
San Lorenzo Valley.
Yeah, so we could certainly take a look at it.
Measured on a
Probably
daily
account for that.
basis.
Right. Okay, fall groundwater level review. So again, we talk every spring, and we're gonna talk this fall, but before we do that, I kind of wanted to go back to a figure that we put in our annual reports to give everybody, again, some perspective about groundwater use in the basin, which helps explain why we monitor what we monitor, the locations that we do. So this is a map that basically shows the known production wells for public supply. So it's our agency wells, which are circles on the map. There are then some private water systems or small public water systems shown as the squares, a couple of triangles for other private uses. So the quarry, for example, would be one of those. And it's also color coded then by which aquifer or formation we actually draw the water from. So we can see up here at San Lorenzo Valley draws water out of Quail Hollow in the Santa Margarita formation. So that's shown in yellow. And then they also draw it out of the Olympia well field, also shown in the Santa Margarita formation. And then around it are a lot of small systems, and they're typically only producing 2 to 5 feet, very small relative to the larger uses. We do have a couple of small water systems, and again, they're only extracting somewhere between 2 and 10 acre feet from the Monterey formation, right? Again, it's not a very good producer. It's a very tight, silty formation, so not a lot of production from there. Then we have, if we go down to this side, it's shown in green, that's the Butano formation, or partially along Peak of Butano. It's the deepest formation. Scotts Valley Water District draws some water from there. And then as we head into the Mount Herman area here, Pasatiempo well field for San Lorenzo Valley Water District, Scotts Valley Water District, and Mount Herman all draw from La Pico formation. So shown in that orange. So there are pretty distinct areas around the basin that we draw water from. And so we monitor the shallow zone, the Santa Margarita, separately from the deep zone. So I'll show you some updated hydrographs from each of those locations that are sort of representative around the basin. So again, if we look at the Quail Hollow well field, this is San Lorenzo Valley Water District, Quail Hollow monitoring well number B. This one's monitoring, you can see levels have been pretty static. What I've done on these hydrographs as opposed to past is also then put minimum thresholds and measurable objectives, right? This is what we're required by SGMA to do. We have to have these sustainable management criteria. We have to track water levels and discuss progress as we go forward. Each one of these is set at January of 2015. We obviously have older data, but 2015 is our compliance point. So I like to kind of focus on that point forward on all of these. And again, for our newer directors, the red dots represent the spring water elevations, which I consider to be the most important ones, because that's when we're starting off the year. We just finished all the winter season. We've seen the recharge that we're gonna get. It's a better indicator of the condition of the basin going forward, but we also are required to monitor the fall. So the blue line is just a continuous collection of data. And ultimately what we can see is the most recent information that's been collected. We're generally on par with last year. And there are some locations that are actually a little bit better, some that's slightly worse. But for purposes of discussion, again, keep these minimum thresholds and measurable objectives in mind. So we don't want to go below the minimum threshold. You can see on occasion, since the law has passed, we have one data point here in Olympia 3 that went slightly below minimum threshold for 1 year. But in general, we stayed above that. Minimum threshold is established at each of these locations. We have good historical data, some cases 30, 40 years. When the GSP was developed, we took the 5 lowest measurements and came up with an average. So that's the red line, that's the number that represents. The average of the 5 lowest measurements that we experienced through that historical period. Then we have the measurable objectives. And it's done differently for the shallow. So all of these are Santa Margarita wells. It's done differently than for the deeper wells. In the shallow wells, we used the measurement from 2004 because it was a period that followed 4 relatively wet or normal years. We felt conditions were in a pretty good place at that time. So we established that green line. It's a measurable objective that says, where do we want to be over the next 40 to 50 years in the basin? So again, we can see in some cases, we're well above those measurable objectives. Others, we're just kind of moving in between those. And again, the important part is to not go below that red line. You are not judged by if you never hit that measurable objective. You are judged by if you go below that minimum threshold. Next. And then in the deeper wells, so in the Lompico and the Butano formation, again, we have some wells around the basin. Again, here we don't measure it anything really along the west because it's all Monterey formation. We have no major production out there. So we don't even have monitoring wells in that area. We're focused down in the Pasatiempo and the Scotts Valley well fields. So here we can see Scotts Valley Water District, TW19. It's completed in the Lompico aquifer. That well has continued to trend up through time, and we're now above the measurable objective in that well, so good news there. Then we have the Cannon well, which is exclusively in the Butano aquifer. It's really pretty static. There's just not a lot going on there. There's not a lot of stress. We're not producing groundwater, but it's also not getting a lot of recharge. So we're seeing water levels. If you look at it closely enough, there's just a very subtle downward trend. Again, nothing alarming there. We're well above the minimum thresholds. We'll have to see as we implement, for example, a conjunctive use program. What this is this assumed that we implement a conjunctive use program of about 530 acre feet per year. We modeled that, and that's how we came up with, if you project that out, that's where we think water levels will be in each of these wells based on that program. So we took a different approach for establishing measurable objectives in these deeper wells. It assumes that we're going to get a conjunctive use program operating in place. So that's why that's up there. Pasatiempo monitoring well number 1. Again, conditions have really improved over the last few years out there, and that's a result of being able to practice some conjunctive use because of the conditions that existed after the fire. In particular, we saw some nice recovery in Pasatiempo NW1. And then finally, Scotts Valley Water District did in the past have a production well in the Monterey Formation itself, and really not a very good producer. Quality probably wasn't all that great either. I don't know that for sure, but turned that well off, and we've just seen water levels just sort of slowly recover, which is what we would expect in a pretty tight formation like that. So that is.
Is the Cannon well still a production well? I mean, there's water.
No, it's just a monitoring well.
We were checking it out for a production well, and it turned out to be our hydrogeologist missing that one by a mile. And it was not a very good area, and I don't really know how reliable that is for the health of the Butano in general, because it was such a problematic, geology that was not expected.
Yeah, because that's not replenishing at all, no water drop. And the theory is that it gets replenished up at the ridge and stuff like that, but
Right.
it's not coming up. So permeability is way too high,
Yeah.
But way too, permeability is low.
Yeah.
The resistance is high.
And I think that's what we were surprised to find when we were drilling there. Big disappointment. Exactly. Okay, great, thank you. Excellent, as always. That takes us to our established ad hoc review committee for the water year 2024 for our annual report. We had a great team together last year to help facilitate what was an excellent template for an annual report going forward. And anyone who was on that, first I would just ask, is anyone want to serve on that subcommittee? Doug did last year. Okay, Ruth would like to? I would not to. Okay, great, thank you. Jeff, you want to put your toe in the water again, so to speak, pardon the pun?
Sure.
I think you're-
Unless Mark wants to do it.
No. We already have one representative from,
Okay.
San Luis Valley Water District who's volunteer.
What about you? He's a wordsmith.
I'm happy to be a ringleader.
You would be great, Jack.
I laughed because Jeff seemed to be co-opted into joining her.
So that would be 5 that's allowable amount, right? Okay. All right, so, I guess, do I have to make a motion? Or is this something that the chair can just?
You can do it by fiat.
Yeah. I love the sound of it.
And lord it over us.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can make the nomination.
Okay, I would nominate, Doug Angfer, and then Jeff Koopman, I would nominate Brian Largate, sorry. And, Ruth Stiles and myself to be on the, ad hoc review committee for the water year 2024.
Okay, and maybe before, I think we do need to make a motion of approval on that, but
Okay,
before
so-
that, let's see if there's any public comment. I'm not seeing any public comment in the room, but let me just look online for the attendees. If you're attending and have a comment, you can raise your hand or otherwise indicate. Not seeing any hands go up, so,
So do I have I mean, I'll call that a motion on that?
Move approval of the appointments as delineated by Chair Perry.
Okay, second. Second, Eden, Cassidy, second.
was that Director Angford first? on
Yes,
that?
sir.
Okay, thank you. We can take the same approach as the last one. If it's
Okay.
unanimous within the room, do you want to see if, within the room, it's all ayes?
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone in
Aye.
the room? Okay, there you go, even outside the room. And I don't see or hear a nay, do I? No nay, all ayes.
Done, thank you very much.
Okay. Annual financial report for the fiscal year ending June 30th. Nick, gonna take this?
That's gonna be me, yeah. I'm gonna take it seated, okay? Hope that's okay. So good evening, everyone. Nick Kearns, I'm the treasurer for Santa Maria Groundwater Agency. I'm presenting the financial statements for the period ended June 30, 2024. So the financial statements have been audited by audit firm Nigro, which also serves as the auditor for Scotts Valley Water District. And the report contains, multiple components that I'm gonna walk through briefly here tonight. And leading off is the independent auditor's report. So in that, Santa Margarita Groundwater Agency received an unmodified opinion on the financial statements. And what that means is that the auditors attest that the financial statements contained in the report are clean. So there are no material misstatements. Next is the management's discussion and analysis, the MD&A. So this is sort of the narrative summary on the report, and some of the highlights I'll point to: the agency's net position. 2024 net position increased 15.09%, which is equivalent to $47,505 compared to prior year. 2024 operating revenue totaled $694,491. That was compared to the prior year's $825,783. And primary reason being decreased grant revenue being utilized for the remainder of the grant. Agency's operating expenses for 2024 decreased $126,11 from $797,597 in 2023 to $646,986. That's due to two reasons. One is a decrease in expenses for the monitoring network enhancements and a decrease in expenses for technical services. So the next section of the report are the meter report, financial statements, which are three. The statement of net position is the balance sheet. And on that, important to note, cash was $464,131 on June 30. Accounts payable, that was the organization's only liability. Accounts payable totaled $101,902. So cash being the only asset, accounts payable being the only liability. I love this simple balance sheet. The balance is unrestricted net position, and that totaled 362,229, which was an increase of 47,505 from the prior year. Next statement, statement of revenues, expenses, and change in net position, which is the income statement. Two sources of revenue, agency contributions and grant revenue. Mentioned the grant revenue, the grant being fully utilized, but there was grant revenue in the period. And there were also agency contributions. So while the grant revenue was down, agency contributions were up. And the grant is recognized as revenue, even though they're passed through agency for the project. Lastly, the statement of cash flow, there are really no financing or investing activities, so it's all highlighted there in operations in terms of what went in and what went out. And simple there that's presented for your information. Quickly, the remainder of the report, the last two sections, one is notes. These are simply expanded explanations of what are in the financial statement. Of note is that there are no litigation concerns for the agency at the moment. And then there's a section on custodial risk. All of the agency's cash is at Santa Cruz County Bank, which is fully collateralized. So there's no custodial risk. Lastly, the final section is a report on internal controls. So the auditor attests that they've reviewed our internal controls surrounding all the transactions. And they found the controls to be sufficient, that there's minimal risk of fraud or misstatement. So with that, concludes my report. Happy to answer questions if you have any.
Any questions? Go ahead.
Good job.
601.
Down at the bank, you said the assets were collateral, the cash of the account is collateralized. What's the word collateralized mean in this case?
Yeah, so all public agency deposits, government code in California requires that the banks collateralize public agency deposits at 110%. The form that takes, I think there's multiple that the code stipulates, but that is a requirement.
The bank manager has to put their house on.
There's a hard asset there.
In that case, it's 150%.
Looks unsafe.
Not a question, but more of a comment. Looking forward, as I interpreted, our net position is about 40,000 or a little bit more, above where we were last year at this time.
Right.
We increased agency contributions by about 40,000. I would hope that when we set agency contributions coming up at a future meeting, we could go back to the 2023 levels, or somewhere below that.
It's good feedback. I mean, I think we had a good discussion at the last meeting about the reserve policy and got clear direction from that. And that will certainly factor into budgeting as that comes up in the year. And I would assume that would.
Unless we see unusual expenses coming up in 2025. That's what I would hope we would reduce agency contributions.
And I think there's a comment in there, we're seeing decline operating costs in the current year. This year reflected some of the final grant related costs, so.
So where are we relative to that target?
We are still in a surplus, we still have reserves over target.
Can you name that number or?
You know what, I think it's probably clear to look at the quarterly reports, but certainly don't have a number.
And we're gonna have to do the big report this year, so that's gonna.
That's the next year's one.
Next year, okay.
So, yeah, I'm sorry, I can get that number to you.
Okay, sure.
Okay, any questions from the audience?
No questions in the room. I'm looking online. I'm not seeing any hands go up or any indication from the online attendees.
Okay, and so I have a motion to accept the auditor's report.
I'll move that we accept the auditor's report.
I'll second.
Okay, all those in favor resoundingly say aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Seeing none? All unanimous? Okay, so that segues right to the first staff report, which is Nick again. Are there any questions on the financial report that's in the?
I have one question and one comment. The question is there, what can you share with us about the, I guess, the credit balance we have with Eco Engineering?
Oh, see that.
Yeah.
See that. Good catch. There was an invoice that was, paid, it looked like there's a partial double payment, so I confirmed with Rob, we're gonna be working through that balance within the next invoice. Yeah, that's what I understood, so we decided instead of issuing reimbursement, we just, take that as credit.
Sounds good. And the comment is, kind of up in the budget versus actuals analysis. If there's another way to format those negative numbers so they jump out a little better, instead of having the minus sign to the left of the dollar sign, I'd endorse that. I don't want it to be a lot of work, but some of those didn't jump out at me.
Yeah, I have the same issue with it. It's really hard for me to read. And
Inconsistent within the body of the report.
the other thing is, do we want over budget as the column? Do we want something like the amount remaining? Because I don't think we're gonna be going over budget.
Or variance,
Variance?
is what I typically see.
That's helpful feedback, I'll take that back. Yeah. Look at editing the report, future, report.
Okay, anything else? Anything from the Papa?
Nothing in the room. I'm not seeing any hands go up online either.
Okay. Santa Margarita implementation activity status.
Written table, if there are any questions, happy to answer them. The only one that I will note is that the fall data that I've been referring to, that we've been collecting, we're in the process of entering that into our data management system. So that we can start preparing the annual report. So that's underway right now.
Anything from anybody? Okay, anything from the audience?
I'm not seeing any hands go up
Okay.
online.
Directors' reports. I wanted to jump in and say that we're gonna lose two valuable directors, Bruce and Jack. And Jack, I think, were you from the beginning? I know Bruce was.
And well, Don was here.
Right,
before
before
me.
you.
Yeah.
But a long time.
Yeah.
And you have been a great eye on certain aspects of what we do here. Certainly your financial background has been valuable. And Bruce, you've been here from the beginning and you've been an excellent community consensus builder with all of our brothers and sisters out there. So we always value your contribution.
I might say that I was I'm on a leadership council in the Public Policy Institute of California. And it was about referring to climate change and mostly energy.
Sure.
They just talked about the importance of water and really, energy and water. If we lose either one of those, that's, we're toast.
Yeah.
And so, it was really interesting, how important water is to our delivery of the energy resources throughout the state. And, I'm not gonna go into technicalities, but, she listed more than I can remember, but, really interesting about how dependent we are in so many ways on water.
Thank you. Thank you again, both of you. And Brian, welcome. Thank you. This is your actual first meeting Irvin, I believe.
Right, I think I came to one or two early on.
Yes.
Just as a community technical contributor.
Yes.
I'm glad to be here in this capacity.
It's very good to have you. Any other directors reports?
I still comment.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah,
just wanted to
please.
comment. Just how much I've enjoyed working with everybody here, with the board members and staff. I've been educated, I've enjoyed the conversations. I had to study a little bit more than other areas because there's so much detail there sometimes, but I enjoyed that. So I have a picture now of what's going on and a meaningful picture. So I know a lot of it's guesswork, but there's studies that back up for it.
And I know you'll be a good voice in the community when people say something, you'll say, well, you know.
Yeah, anyway, so I've enjoyed it a lot, so thank you, everybody. Yeah.
How about a round of applause for all of you?
Yeah.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Be a little something extra, you pay envelopes. Any other directors have any reports, have anything? Yes.
Yeah, I found a really interesting podcast. It's about water in Arizona. And yeah, they had something like Sigma that they came up with, and I think Sigma is somewhat taking that as a guideline, although it's very different for California. We don't have transit aquifers where they plan on putting water in an aquifer to take it out later and move it around the state. Anyway, it's a in-depth podcast. You can start anywhere. And I just find it fascinating because it's a desert state and water is so obviously important there. Podcast is packed.
Great, thank you. And I just want to not really report, but just mention that you probably saw the email that we are hosting a table at the annual environmental town hall on Saturday, November 16th from 1 to 3. Anyone who wants to come by and spend a little time, I believe Tim and Dave are gonna be there. I was gonna come by for a little bit in the beginning, at least an hour or so. And everyone is welcome. Just get in touch with Tim, let him know. Okay. So that takes us down to invitation for board requests or future agenda items. Anyone have anything particular they'd like to see on the agenda in the future? Okay. Informational calendar, told you about the 10-year anniversary is coming up. We're gonna make that, and the Aqua Conference, and the mention of Aqua, that's the Association of California Water Agencies. And yes, I bet you they will be very involved in the interconnected groundwater guidance coming from Department of Water Resources. And they're a good group to do that. They represent a lot of people and they can do some good lobbying. So hopefully they don't get completely out of control and so far away from the law that it's like, you sit there and go, really? Are you guys the legislature now? Anyway, I think that's it.
Is there anything else we need to do to get to our mandatory 45 minutes?
Oh, good, Dave, thank you.
Did you want to do a little update about our attorney situation after the last meeting?
Oh,
That we are going to go ahead and hire
Yes.
Carrie with stipulation that if there's ever any kind of litigation between Scotts Valley Water and the Santa Margarita, that she would represent Santa Margarita.
I'd like to clarify that.
There you go.
If there's ever litigation, you wouldn't ever want to use me because I've never gone to court. I don't even know anything about litigation. But if there's a conflict of interest,
Right.
that's when I would stay with the water board here. And then the Scotts Valley Water District would get.
It's on their own.
You're on your own.
That's well put there, thank you. So there's the mandatory 45 minutes.
Yeah.
I believe, no, 44. So do I hear a motion to adjourn?
Moved.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Ronnie, no?
Aye, I'm very.
Not there, yeah.
Okay, thank you all very much.